So Games Workshop haven't been making themselves enormously popular lately, and it's putting at least a few people in tricky positions if you want to keep on playing their hobby. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today I just wanted to talk a bit about Games Workshop's reputation lately. It's kind of hard to ignore with every second comment on the channel over a few previous videos being about how people are thinking about taking a break from buying Games Workshop's stuff. I feel like it's really quite an interesting power negotiation between Games Workshop and the community, which I think largely stems from Games Workshop owning basically a monopoly on Warhammer, a hobby that they have so many people really heavily invested in. In general, Games Workshop's attitude and popularity does seem to have waxed and waned over the years. Around about 10 years they went through a phase of being really quite monolithic and standoffish, basically having little or no communication with fans, just releasing things when they released them and giving no one any heads up. There was certainly no guarantee that any codex or book would get any sort of updates in any one edition, and if game balance is bad now, it was truly terrible towards the end of 7th edition, with units with 2+ rerollable invul saves, and all sorts of other rubbish that made any sort of competitive Warhammer kind of a joke. I believe it did get to the point where it was truly affecting their sales and bottom line, losing out a lot of market share to other games such as War Machine, which was in the ascendance, though they did manage to turn it around. Games Workshop got a new CEO, and started actually behaving like a normal company, doing market research, actually FAQing and updating their game with balance changes, the launch of Age of Sigmar, which has largely been a success, and Warhammer 40k 8th edition, which brought a ton of people back to the game. After experiencing their old ways, I found that people in general were quite willing to give Games Workshop a bit of credit for making some progress, but it does seem, at least in terms of reputation, they've maybe been backsliding quite a bit over the past few months. There really have been quite a few things that have got people annoyed at Games Workshop over the last few months, most recently and clearly brought to the head by the recent IP protection moves that they've made, either pushing animators into working with them on Warhammer Plus or just stopping them from doing any sort of 40k fan animations, and their recent zero tolerance statement on intellectual property and fan animations, which has caused text-to-speech to abandon 40k for the time being. I'd argue that they haven't really changed their official stance on this, they've just made it a little bit more clear. And in terms of some of the bigger fan animations, they were actually taking action on it, maybe not necessarily beginning any sort of legal proceedings, but at least threatening to in some cases. A few people have been saying that it might be some sort of slippery slope where Games Workshop tries to take out virtually every bit of 40k content on YouTube, things like battle reports, painting channels or lore channels, and I must say I will be quite surprised if they made any further moves like this. I think actually making original content with their own characters and IP is quite different to either, say, discussing backgrounds or playing a game while people watch, which is all essentially that lore channels and battle reports are. I've got no doubt that they could make life a lot harder for those creators. They could try and be really aggressive with copyright striking, for example, but I don't think they'd have any legal way to stop them creating their content. I would worry for certain other things though, like Tabletop Simulator, the program where you can basically play 40k online with fan-made content. They did update their IP statement saying you can't make fan video games with any sort of 40k content in, and I do wonder if they might move against that at some point, though it will be a great shame for people playing games with each other across the world. In any case, a lot of people really aren't happy that a lot of these awesome fan creations and creators are getting taken down, either through direct contact with Games Workshop or being scared off by their slightly draconian approach. Otherwise, there's a fair bit of dissatisfaction for other reasons. Game balance in 40k really isn't amazing at the moment, where even between the already released 9th edition codexes there's great big power disparities, particularly looking at some of the first released ones, say like Codex Necrons, and some of the stronger things that have come later like Admech and Drakari. It does feel like a fair amount of deliberate codex creep, using strong rules as a cynical way of driving sales, which I think we get that Games Workshop does to a point, but when it goes too far, it really can impact negatively on the game. High prices, as always, are one of the things I'm least a fan of for Games Workshop. They do continue to spiral upwards and keep people out of the hobby, and in terms of the kits that they actually do release, they have made a fair few unpleasant moves. Any sort of big box or limited edition release will sell out very quickly, due to them not having printed all that many, and it feels like they're going for a fair amount of forced scarcity. Some recent campaign books for 40k, such as the Warzone Charadon ones, feel very much like day one DLC for Codex content that they could have easily put in the Codex, and the very strange case of the Warhammer Cursed City thing, which seemed to be something that they were setting up as an ongoing release, similar to Blackstone Fortress. Then they basically sold a whole bunch of the box, never reprinted it, and quietly dropped it as a product going forward with zero communication with anyone who was invested. Clearly something along the lines went very badly wrong there, but it's a bit frustrating having no communication as to why Games Workshop dropped that line. Between all of this, at least a fair few people in the YouTube comments do seem to be pretty tired of Games Workshop right now, and either wish they'd changed course or just do a little bit to address some of these issues. I feel like it's quite helpful to remember that Games Workshop and the hobby of Warhammer are two separate things. One is the actual hobby, all the building, painting and gaming, and the other is the company that owns the IP and therefore makes the books, prints the models and everything else. Games Workshop certainly don't own a monopoly on all of wargaming. There's certainly other wargames that you can play, but they really do hold down an enormous chunk of the wargaming hobby as a whole, and a huge amount of highly invested players that aren't all the most likely to jump ship and try out another system. I feel like playing Warhammer 40k or Age of Sigmar is really a bit of a lifestyle game really, a really deep hobby where there's always more to explore and you could literally dedicate large chunks of your life to it if you wanted. The background is about as rich and deep as you can get for any sci-fi universe, and people invest enormous amounts of time, money and effort making and painting their armies into something that looks really spectacular on the table, and it really does make it quite hard to step away from that. There's also the social aspect as well. If you hang out with a whole bunch of people because you tend to meet up to play games of 40k for example, unless you know them so well that you've been getting into doing other things with them as well, by leaving the game you might not be seeing anywhere near as much of a bunch of people, and that could also be quite sad and could be one reason to keep you playing even if you're not necessarily enjoying it as much as you used to. I think having such a big, really invested fan base like this means that Games Workshop really can afford to make a lot of mistakes and they won't really be very heavily punished. If a supermarket chain kept on raising their prices and doing a lot of things that their customers didn't like, they'd go elsewhere. But the same really isn't as easy of a hobby that you've sunk so much time, effort and love into. And it means that if you do want to play the current version of Warhammer 40k, generally you are going to have to accept Games Workshop at least somewhat. As a company, Games Workshop are certainly incentivized to make the maximum amount of money possible, and unfortunately that will mean generally just pushing us about as far as we can go, before people actually wind up being tired of the hobby, leaving it en masse, and then it actually starts to affect their bottom line. I think there's generally going to be that split motivation for them between whether they keep on making a quality product and attract more and more people to the hobby that way, and using any one release as a nice short-term cash grab, maybe by unbalancing the rules, charging even more for it, or by swooping in to stamp out any competitors, including people making things like fan animations. I think a lot of little decisions can annoy people like this, and it could take them a very, very long time to realise that their game is declining again. They certainly got very set in their ways before the slightly newer version of Games Workshop, and they started to actually make some changes for the better. So in general, Games Workshop is always going to be in quite a powerful position when it comes to doing what's in their own interest, even the times when it's going against the will of their own fanbase. In terms of us as a community, I think there's two main ways of giving Games Workshop feedback, either communicating directly to them, either via their social media or emails, or potentially by people buying less of their products if they're unhappy with the way that the company is acting at the moment. With the recent drama over text-to-speech leaving 40k, I'm sure that recently they'll have been absolutely flooded with requests to change their IP rules and to allow creators like them to continue without the threat of legal action or anything else. I've noticed quite a lot of comments like that also cropping up on any of their social media posts, even completely unrelated stuff, though of course they don't always allow comments on anything. You can't say comment on Warhammer community, for example, nor do they allow any comments on their YouTube videos on their official Warhammer TV channel. There's no way they're not already well aware about their IP rules and the annoyance they've caused. I feel like sometimes outcry like this actually makes a difference. They did respond pretty quickly, saying they'd print more Indomitus boxes once they sold out and everyone was annoyed, but sometimes they just completely ignore it, such as what they did with Curse City, and basically never made any sort of official statement on that, other than just going completely silent on the box and the lack of support for it. I feel like just with the nature of these bad news stories, generally people will kick up quite a lot of fuss at the start, but then sentiment will slowly fizzle away. It's not easy for a lot of people to maintain the same level of feeling and prominence in their minds, even if they still disapprove of the company's actions. Otherwise, I've seen quite a lot of people talking about either boycotting Games Workshop or buying less stuff, and that's certainly an option that people can vote with their wallets, and it does sound like Games Workshop will be losing a fairly significant amount of sales because people are annoyed at them. I think a lot of people aren't necessarily saying that they wouldn't ever buy anything again, but are happy to take, say, a fair few months off to show Games Workshop their displeasure, or just because they don't really feel like committing all that much more to Warhammer at the moment. In particular, Warhammer Plus does seem to be something that a lot of people are turned against now, as it does seem to be the thing that's caused Games Workshop to clamp down and be a bit more mean with their IP. I certainly feel like less people are going to be subscribing to that than they would have otherwise, but in terms of overall sales and revenue, I really don't think that Games Workshop are going to feel it all that much, although it might often feel like sentiment is really quite low in the comments of YouTube videos and things. I feel like people who are super engaged and following news stories like this are still in somewhat of a minority, and a huge amount of Games Workshop's customers just really don't follow all this all that much, and just play and collect on a far more casual level. For anyone who did feel like taking a bit of a break from Games Workshop's purchases, I would bear in mind there are quite a lot of other options available. For miniatures, there's potentially other war games, or even just independent miniature companies, making things that are kind of like Warhammer 40k. You could certainly use them in games if you weren't attending any big tournaments or playing in Games Workshop's actual stores. You could just play with existing models for a fair while, experiment with older editions of the game, or just get to work on any existing piles of shame that may or may not exist in your own home. I know I myself have more than enough kits to keep me busy till the end of the year without buying anything else. And potentially there's always Tabletop Simulator for playing some online games of Warhammer 40k. Obviously very shaky from a Games Workshop IP point of view, but they don't seem to have moved against them yet. I myself will still be covering Games Workshop news and releases on the channel. It's what you guys have all subscribed for. I've never covered any other games previously, and I'm not about to arbitrarily twist into something else just to make a point. It certainly does make things a bit harder talking about Warhammer 40k when Games Workshop's doing things that I don't particularly approve of, and particularly things that I know might well threaten me as a YouTube content creator in the future. I'd really absolutely love to be talking positively about Games Workshop, but they don't make it easy sometimes, hence why I find myself making videos like this. In general though, I'm not going to be trying to tell anyone what to do, and it's up to you guys as individuals whether you want to keep on buying stuff from Games Workshop at the moment. Anyway, I hope some of that made at least some sense. Look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. It's definitely a complicated issue. It's definitely tricky when the hobby that you love is all mixed up with a company that does some things that I approve of, as well as lots of things that really quite annoy me. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where I'll certainly keep the 40k game related content coming, with new videos coming out pretty much every day. Finally, if you have been enjoying the videos I make, I'd just like to mention the channel has a Patreon page, and you can find that down in the video description if interested. It is what allows me to make videos like this quite so often. There are a few advantages for channel patrons, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next for the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with a chance to win some really big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, then the link is down in the video description below. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.